So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read it then from Yeshayahu the prophet, we then understand the 61st chapter related with the Leviticus the 23rd chapter, the feasts of the Creator. And then we find ourselves studying what's going on in the world as far as the new system is concerned. Well, the best system, computerized system, is the Alibaba company, and they are very prominent, and they had the world's largest IPO done a few months ago, and then they have a strategy of giving their services in the US basis. So then the competition with Amazon, obviously Alibaba is going to win. So then, as far as we can read from the Holy Instructions, we know the system of the East, or then the Dragonic system, is then being set up, as far as we can understand, on the Revelation of the 20th chapter. You find references of the dragon and the system of the dragon. And then Alibaba is taking its place. So then the systems that are being developed as far as telephones and computers, they are then advancing themselves as the new information becomes available. Let's then make an evaluation as far as the Holy Instructions. We then find the Dragonic period, as we understand, comes from a facet of the beast, and during the times that we are at, we then can gather the information, and the first holy city on the land of Cush in the northern part of Africa is the other layer related with the second son. But primarily, the system is presenting itself very strongly. Alibaba then is given many kinds of ideas, many kinds of deals in their system. And not only this, but via computer and via telephone, you can buy, then you can give, you can send gifts, and not only regular people, but then industry can be easily purchased items from these great huge company, and advancing itself towards the people. How then is going to be advanced towards the people, where then this company, they had the largest IPO, their strategy obviously is working, and making a reference of then the civilians. The point is reaching the civilian population in remote areas with signal, or then a computer signal or internet signal, and doing then what the Chinese president has indicated, rural areas then being motivated, and then using the computer and telephones as a means of purchase. This should lead to the area where then the instructions are given us as far as the freighters of the earth. Natural fact is, when an area of a country is targeted as a potential buying place, as of yet the third step is not yet clear. The third step is yet coming, because it has to have more purchases, more purchasing power around the world, and then becoming more reliable the system in order to have the third step, and the step of investment directly in the same system of purchase and receiving and sending. As then rural areas are receiving more reliable signal, then they can start buying from these major companies. How do they do this? Very simply, they make a link with their banking, the internet banking, and obviously in a very near future we are going to have choices of what kind of monetary system a person wants to use. Thus then the exchange done instantly via computer, and then nations coming up with a card. It was already explained previously of a card where you have then percentages set in this card that is then government owned, given to each citizen doing trade via computer. In this card then has the percentages of transaction, of sending, of receiving money with any kind of monetary system in the world. So then what a person can gather as far as taxes would be then a transfer of funding from one to another, and every time a transfer is made, then taxes can be gathered depending upon the policy of the country where the person is at. This truly aligns itself with what then the instructions are leading toward, the point of these freighters becoming the greater power of this earth. Now, they don't become powers of their own. They are bound to the rules and regulations set per each country and set from these cards given to those people using them. Let's say, for instance, you have a nation who then gives 6% taxes in every transaction, as an example, plus another maybe couple of percent per transfer of funding depending on the volume, or then couple of percent in receiving some funding from overseas. So then as a person then receives from the, let's say for instance, the investment, if the investment was already available, and truly it is not yet, but let's say if it was, when a person then invests in a certain amount and then receives from these investments directly on products as they are being produced, also when the person receives in a certain amount, taxes could be gathered. So each of these points leads us in alignment with the instructions where then the system is going to be positioned at, so then these cards can be made. Now if a person changes the country, obviously a new card has to be used, because where the person is going then doing trade in this particular country, then the percentages are then not the same as the previous, because some countries are going to place a heavier taxes in a certain transactions, in other countries in other transactions. So then you understand the complexity of this new Dragonic system. But the most important point is then doing trade via telephone and via computer related with rural areas, so then the infrastructure can start taking place. As far as we can understand, roads must be fixed, and as they are fixed, then fuel stations are a must, then supermarkets are a must, tiny shops everywhere so people they can get more jobs. So these areas of infrastructuring related also with freighting and taxation, and the freighters themselves, each time there is a link with these system, then the data that these freighters have of their own must be lended to those governments, so then when taxes are gathered, then when the purchases are made, then taxes are gathered instantly. So you can observe by step what's going on. It can be extremely extensive. Now the point is, when the investment icon is launched, then nations won't have much choice as far as the rights involved with the usage of computers and financial systems. For instance, if you have banking in your computer, the hardest situation in the world is for a person to try to get into your rights of usage of your own computer. So you can imagine then later on when the Chinese, they launch the investment icon. Imagine the complexity of changing the rights of banking and then computers and trying to work through the system and then gathering up taxes, lending then the freighters, giving to them the data related with their own system, plus then coming up with a card so a person can do trade from country to country. So the system is becoming a whole lot more complicated. So in terms of military dominance, as far as we can understand, is not as important as then the importance of having these systems straightened out. Now the point is this: you can't have a card being made without having regulations and laws of investments via online directly on products. But what can take place is leaving then a space in this card, so then when this new icon comes up, then people already know what is taking place as far as what it takes to get these taxes of investments from the systems themselves. As if you had, for instance, a card. A few years ago, some computers, they did not have the wireless system. You had to have a card. It's somewhat lengthier than a regular credit card, but then you could use in your computer in a slot on the side, then you could get the signal from the air. So then as this card then becomes available for every individual doing trade via computer, as we understand, China already has the social network only for traders. So you can understand how serious the situation is as we then march on into the future, and then these particular details of investments and then receiving and sending and transfers and buying and sending money and receiving money, how complicated these can be when the new system then is entirely launched. Nations won't have much time to do this. And China has the forward motion of the entire situation because they have the most important systems of trade and then internet trading, and Alibaba, for instance, the most important, so they have the know-how. As far as Revelation, we find then the chapter related with the freighters of the earth. The freighters of the earth, and the freighters of the earth, and the freighters of the earth. And you hardly hear anymore the word kingdom. You don't hear of nations anymore. This indicates the importance of the freighters as they are the means of taxes gathering. That's why then the freighters are so important. Reading from Daniel, the 11th chapter, we have then the events of the flow of the events of the kingdom of the east, north, and south. Now we have to understand sections of the 11th chapter of Daniel explains going southbound and northbound rather than Kingdom of the North and South. So I have to understand how to read it, how to navigate and flow in this scripture. Then later on comes then the false covenant and the real covenant. So these are dynamics also working through. What can we understand as far as the new system is concerned? Then it's up to every country coming up with a card, or at least the sketches of what they want for taxes. Because when the system comes and people start buying and investing with a foreign monetary system, such as for instance Bitcoin and other kinds of foreign monetary systems, because of the rights involved with the computer transactions, nations won't be able to get in the system to get taxes from. So then, with this in mind, later on I'm going to evaluate other situations related with Dragonic period and then the military movements of the Revelation. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.